what's up everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chaf Zayin of Masechta Ayruvin, Daf 27. We are beginning the new parak, the parak of Bechol or Bakol probably. Bechol, probably Bakol. Bakol Ma'arvin. You can make an Eruv with all sorts of things. That's the parak we're starting. And so the Gemara starts off talking about Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, who says that you cannot rely on general rules. Even when the exceptions are listed, there may be more exceptions. We'll talk about that. Salt water in the context of using it for an Eruv and buying Meiser Sheni. Can you buy salt? Well, can you buy salt? Can you buy water? Can you buy salt water? Very exciting stuff. And we're talking about, can you buy salt water with Meiser Sheni money? That actually gets a little bit interesting. And then buying fish with Meiser Sheni money. Well, if you like fish, that could be relevant. Let's go weiter. So, let us begin. New parak. Bakol Ma'arvin Daf Chav Vav Amud Beis. Bakol Ma'arvin. Umishtatfin. Chutz min hamayim u'min hamelach. You can make an Eruv Chatzeros, Eruv Tchumen, Shitufei Mevoos. You can use any food you want for that stuff. However, do not just put like salt in somebody's house and be like, alright, we got some salt there. It's like we're all living there now. As Rashi says, that he explains that basically you need mazon when it comes for when it comes to like Eruv and Shitufim Vos, you need mazon. You need the whole point is that you're putting food in somebody's house, and it's like because your food is there, it's like your das is there, and that's where you are. Salt doesn't really fit the bill, it's not like significant enough to be considered like, you're spending Shabbos in this person's house because you have a little bit of salt there or a bottle of water. It has to be something more significant. Now, Meiser Sheni, as we know. So you have your field, and then you separate Truma, you separate Meiser, and then on years 1, 2, 4, and 5, you separate Meiser Sheni, which is another 10% that you take. And this 10% you take to Jerusalem and you eat it there. Now, you don't have to schlep all of your produce to Jerusalem. Instead, what you can do is you can transfer the value to money and then just go spend that money in Jerusalem. So if you transfer that money, the value to money, and then you go to Jerusalem and you want to start buying up food to eat with that money, you can't just buy salt and water. Okay, you have to buy other things. Fine. Hanoder min hamazon mutar b'melech u'mayim. We saw this in Masechta Brachos, that somebody, right, when we were trying to figure out, what's mazon. So we said basically so the kasha was, it sounds like anything other than water and salt would be considered mazon. So then I think we made an afkamina between, what was it, mazon and zan or something? Something like that. Anybody remember? It was mazon and no, I can't remember. It was mazon and like something else. And maybe it was an African between like zan and mazon or something. Alright, can't remember. Anyways, where were we again? So somebody who says, look, I'm not having any more mazon for the rest of my life. Well, for the rest of your life, which may or may not be much longer, you're allowed to drink water and salt. Well, you're allowed to have water and salt. Well, enjoy. Ma'arvin l'nazir b'yayin u'lisah b'truma. So interestingly, a nazir, who of course is not allowed to drink wine, he would be allowed to use wine for an Eruv, which is interesting, even though he wouldn't be able to consume it, at least not now. Now, a Yisrael is allowed to make an Eruv with Truma, even though the Yisrael cannot eat Truma. Sumchos Omer b'chulin. Sumchos says that it would not work. Yisrael would not be allowed to use Truma for an Eruv. He would have to use Chulin because he can't eat the Truma. Okay. A Kohen can make an Eruv, I guess, if he wants to make an Eruv Tchumen, right? So that he can extend his Rishus so basically that wherever this Eruv is, as we've seen in the past, Eruv Tchumen is that if you want to be able to walk more than 2,000 amos. Now, you're not actually allowed to walk more than 2,000 amos from where you are for Shabbos. The point is that you're just going to change the legal location of where you are for Shabbos. So let's say you live in a city, and that city is 4,000 amos away from the next city, and you want to travel to the next city. So what you can do is right in the middle, you can put your Ayruvin Trumin right in the middle, and then it will be like that is where you are for Shabbos, in which case you have 2,000 amos from where you put your food, which it means basically 2,000 amos to the city where you live in, and 2,000 amos away from where it is, which gets you to the city where you live in, as well as 2,000 amos in the other direction, which will get you to the other city that you want to go to. So now a Kohen, if he wants to make an Ayruvin Trumin, he can do it he can even put his food in the Beis HaPras. Who remembers what a Beis HaPras is? It's come up at least twice, I think. Beis HaPras is a field that has a dead body in there somewhere, but you're not exactly sure where it is, so it's a suffix tumah. So we say that a Kohen would be allowed to make an Eruv in a Beis HaPras. I think the Gemara is going to talk about why, but not yet. Rabbi Yehuda Omer afilu ben akvaros mipnei she'achol lachutz v'leilech v'lechol. And Rabbi Yehuda says you can even actually put his Eruv between graves, because there are ways of being able to make sort of separations and being able to go there and eat his Eruv. So that would actually be acceptable as well. And I think we're going to have to discuss that in the Gemara. Chevra, let's move on. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yochanan ein lemedin min haklalos. We do not learn out from general rules, even when it specifically says the exceptions to the rule. So, what does this mean? So if you have like a Mishnah that has a general rule, I don't know, this is the rule. So it would sound like you can just, okay, here's our rule, we can apply it. Says Rabbi Yochanan, no. Whenever we have general rules, you cannot just blindly apply them to whatever situations you think would fit the bill. And that is even if the rule includes the exceptions. Because I might think, okay, it's being pretty specific, right? Here's the rule, these are the exceptions. So I think it's pretty clear, right? This is the rule. These are where it doesn't apply. Mistama, everywhere else it applies, right? Wrong. So, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, ein lemedin min haklalos v'afilu b'makom shenemar bo chutz. Says Rabbi Yochanan, you can't just blindly assume to apply general rules, and that is even if the exceptions to the rule are listed. Okay? So now from the fact that Rabbi Yochanan, in his statement, we don't know when or where Rabbi Yochanan said his statement. We just know that he has this statement. Rabbi Yochanan said that, look, we cannot apply general rules even when the exceptions are said. So now the Gemara wants to say that Mistama Rabbi Yochanan was not saying that specifically about our Mishnah. What makes us think that Rabbi Yochanan was not saying a statement specifically about our Mishnah? Because our Mishnah said, because Rabbi Yochanan says that you're not allowed to apply general rules, and you should know that that is even when the exceptions are listed, implying that he was referring to some Mishnah or some place where the exceptions were not listed, and he was saying, right, there was just some general rule in some Mishnah, and we're going to see what that Mishnah is, but the Gemara is saying, look, we can assume that Rabbi Yochanan was not talking about our Mishnah, because Mistami was talking about some Mishnah or Brisa where there was a general rule and there were no exceptions listed. And Rabbi Yochanan was pointing out that, by the way, you should know, when we have general rules like this, the one that whatever he's talking about, when you have general rules like this, you can't just apply them. And, by the way, that even applies if it were to list the exceptions as well. So Mistami is talking about some place where there's a general rule without exceptions. He was pointing out that you cannot apply general rules, and adding that that would even be when the exceptions are listed. Even though they're not listed here, if they were to have been listed, still you would not be able to apply that general rule. Which means that Rabbi Yochanan is saying a statement about some general rule that's without exceptions. Now, our Mishnah lists exceptions, right? It says, Bakoma Arvin, that's a general rule. You can make an Eruv with anything, okay? So I can make an Eruv with whatever I want. Chutz min hamayim min hamelach. The exceptions being water and salt, okay? So at face value, I would think, okay, so I can make an Eruv with anything I want. There are two exceptions, water and salt. I can make an Eruv with anything other than water and salt. So what Rabbi Yochanan is pointing out is that these general rules you cannot just blindly apply, and that's even when we have a situation like in our Mishnah where it says the exceptions, even then it wouldn't, you can't just go by the general rules. There might be other exceptions as well. And then the question is, what was the Mishnah or Brisa that Rabbi Yochanan was saying it to was applying this rule too, because mistama, that Mishnah or Brisa didn't have an exception, didn't have exceptions to the rule listed, which is why he was pointing out that you can't apply general rules even if there were to be the exceptions listed with the rule, such as our Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan's not talking about our Mishnah clearly. Okay. I hope that was whatever. Let's go weiter. So, Michlal Delav, right? So, Midika Amar, third line of Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. Midika Amar afilu b'makom shenemar b'chutz, from the fact that Rabbi Yochanan had to point out that you can't apply general rules, and that would apply even when the exceptions are listed. Michlal Delav ha'chakai mistama, he is not talking about our Mishnah. So then heichakai, so then what Mishnah is he referring to when he makes his statement? Hasum kai, he's referring to there. Where? Kol mitzvahs esei she'azman grama, anashim chayavin v'nashim p'turos. That we have a general rule that says that whenever you have a mitzvahs aseh, a positive commandment, that is time bound. That is somehow related to time. There's a time when you do it, and then outside of that time you don't do it. So anashim chayavin v'nashim p'turos. So men would be chayav to do these mitzvahs. Women would be p'turos from doing these mitzvahs. Fine. V'shalo azman grama. Now, if you have a positive commandment that has no connection to time, it's just always relevant. Whenever, in whatever context it's relevant, it's always relevant. So then, echad nashim ve'echad anashim chayavin. Well then, men and women would be chayavin equally. Right? So if you have a positive commandment that has nothing to do with time, so then it applies to men and women, to both men and women. Fine. Uchlala dechol mitzvahs aseh she'azman grama nashim p'turos. But one second. Now, is this really true? Right? Meaning, we just said a general rule that whenever you have mitzvahs aseh she'azman grama, women would be p'turos from that mitzvah. However, I can give you examples of mitzvahs aseh she'azman grama that women are chayavos. Harei matzah simcha v'hakel. What about eating matzah? That's a mitzvah that says man grama. The mitzvah of matzah is on the first night of Pesach. Simcha, being happy, v'samachta b'chagecha, being happy on Yom Tif. So that's clearly connected to Yom Tif. V'hakel, right? Or on the 8th year, right? The year following Shemitah, so was on Sukkot. So then the king goes and he reads Sefer Devarim. So that's at a specific time. The mitzvah says sheish azman grama, hu v'nashim chayavos, and women are chayavos in this mitzvah. So meaning, on the one hand, we have a general rule, which is that mitzvah aseh azman grama, women are p'turos, and yet there are exceptions to that rule. Matzah, simcha, hakel, v'chol mitzvah aseh shelo azman grama, nashim chayavos. And then we said any mitzvah aseh shelo azman grama that has no connection to any time, so then women are chayavos. Hari Talmud Torah, Peri V'Rivya, Ofidin Ben. But what about Torah study and having children and doing Pidyon Ben, that when there's a firstborn son, so you redeem him with some money? So those are all mitzvahs upon, right? The chiyuv is upon the men to do it. The mitzvah to say shelo azman grama, it's a mitzvah to say that is not connected to time at all. V'nashim p'turos, and yet women would be p'turos. So what do we see? So we see that there are these general rules, specifically when it comes to, in this context, mitzvahs aseh she'azman grama, and mitzvahs aseh shelo azman grama, and there are exceptions to those rules. Elo amar Rabbi Yochanan ein lemeidim min haklalos. Rather, says Rabbi Yochanan, you cannot just take these general rules at face value, v'afilu b'makom shenemar b'chutz, and that applies even if the exceptions to the rule are listed. There might even be more exceptions. Amar Abai v'tem Rabbi Yirmiyah, says Abai, and some say it was Rabbi Yirmiyah, afananami tanina. We can also learn this out from the following Mishnah. Od klal echad amru, they said an additional rule, which is kol shenise al gabe azav tameh. So anything that is carried on top of a zav is tameh, and this refers to his clothing, to his outer clothing, right? Let's say he's wearing a few layers of clothing, so even the outer layers would become tameh. V'choshu nisa alav tahor. Now, anything that a zav is carried upon, so that thing that the zav is upon would remain tahor. Okay, chutz min haroy lemishkav u'moshav, as we learned in Masechta Shabbos, except for something that is fit for riding on or sitting on, or maybe for lying down and sitting on, right? As we learned about amod v'naseh melachtenu, do you remember that? Meaning, in order for something to be tamei tumas midras, because of mishkav u'moshav azav, so it would need to be something that is meant for sitting. But if it's something, let's say he takes like a bucket, he goes to a construction site and he takes a bucket and he flips it over and he sits on it. Well, that thing is not going to be tamei tumas midras, because in a second from now, one of the construction workers is going to say, hey, get up, I need that bucket. So it's not something specific for sitting. So we say that anything that is of sits on would remain tahor, except something that is for sitting on, designated for sitting. Ve'adam, as well as a person. If a person carries a zav, that person will become tamei. Visuleka, one second. So that Mishnah gave two examples of exceptions, right? The rule being that anything that a zav sits on is tahor. The exceptions being mishkav u'moshav and a human. But are there no other examples? Visuleka ve'ika merkav. What about something that he rides on? Hai merkav ve'chidami. What is this thing that he rides on? Idi yasev alei. If it's something that he's just sitting on, well then hainu moshav. Well, we just said that mishkav u'moshav is going to be tamei from the zav. So, anan hachi kamrinam, what we're saying is, ha'ika gava de ukafa. There is this thing on the saddle of an animal that he holds onto. So he's not sitting on it, right? And yet, it can become tamei from a zav. Titania ukaf tamei moshav, that the saddle is tamei moshav, okay, because it's something that's meant for sitting. Ve'atafus, and this thing that the person sitting on the saddle holds onto is tamei merkav, is nonetheless tamei. So we see that there is, so we had said that anything that a zav sits on is tahor. There are two exceptions, something that is meant for sitting on, as well as a human, if somebody carries a zav. Those were the only two exceptions listed in the Mishnah, yet apparently there are actually more exceptions. If there's this thing that you hold on to when you're sitting on the saddle, so you're not sitting on it, and yet it is tamei from the zav. So we see that even though there are exceptions listed by the rule, the exceptions are not limited to those that are listed. Elishmamina ein lemedim min haklalos. We do not learn out from general rules. Va'afilu b'makom shenamar b'chutz, even when the exceptions are listed together with the rule. Amar Ravina, v'temer Rav Nachman, said Ravina. Some said Rav Nachman. Af ananami tanina. We can also learn this out from our Mishnah. B'chol ma'arvin u'mishtatfin chutz min hamayim ve'amelach. It says in our Mishnah that you can use for an eruv or for shitufei muvaos anything. Just don't use water or salt. V'suleka, what? There are no others. Ve'aika k'meinu fitrios. You can't use truffles or mushrooms either. Rather, we see that you cannot learn out from general rules, even if the exceptions are listed together with the rules. Okay, the Mishnah said, that anything can be purchased with the money of the Meiser Sheni, right? So you took your Truma, your Meiser, and your Meiser Sheni from your field, then you transferred the value of the Meiser Sheni onto money, and you're going to bring that money to Jerusalem and buy all sorts of food and eat it. So the question is, what can you buy? We say you can buy whatever you want. But don't buy water and salt. That doesn't count. Anything else? Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. So we have the opinions here of Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. Chad masni ha'eruv, chad masni ha'maiser. And one of them said their statement in the context of eruv, and the other one said their statement in the context of maiser sheni. Chad masni ha'eruv. So one of them said their statement in the context of eruv. Lo shanu ela mayim b'fnei atzmo v'melach b'fnei atzmo de'ein me'arvin. Aval mayim v'melach me'arvin. Right? So this Manda Amar said that when we say that you cannot use water and salt for an eruv, it means water alone or salt alone. But lemaise, if you mix them together and make salt water, well then it's an ander azach. It's another thing. That's fine. No big deal. You can use it for an eruv. Okay? And the other one said his statement in the context of maaser sheni. Lo shanu ela mayim b'fnei atzmo v'melach b'fnei atzmo dein nikachin. Aval mayim v'melach nikachin. Because of maaser. And the other Manda Amr says that when we say that you may not purchase water and salt with Meiser Sheni money, it means you may not purchase water alone and salt alone, but salt water, enjoy. No problem, you can buy it. Manda Masni Meiser Kol Shekain Eruv. Now, the Manda Amar, remember, either Rabbi Elazar or Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina, whichever one of them says that you'd be allowed to purchase salt water with Meiser Sheni money, well, then certainly you would be able to use salt water for an Eruv. However, the Manda Amar who says that you can use salt water for an Eruv, he would say that you are unable to use the salt water for Meiser Sheni, because by Meiser Sheni it needs to be fruit. It needs to be fruit. It needs to be food. And therefore, salt water would not fit the bill. Meaning it would have to be something that grew from something else, right? It's like a fruit grows from a seed. So, but this is just kind of water and salt, and that wouldn't be the case. Kiyasa Rabbi Yitzchak, Masnia Meiser. So when Rabbi Yitzchak came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, so he taught this in the context of Meiser, meaning he came and said that you're allowed to use Meiser Sheni money to buy salt water. Okay? Meisvei, but they asked a kasha on Rabbi Yitzchak. Hey, Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, Lifnei Rabbi Eliezer, that Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish taught or testified in front of Rabbi Eliezer, and he said, Shal Beis Abba, that in my father's house, hayu lokhin sir b'kesef meiser. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish said in front of Rabbi Eliezer that, in his family, they would use Meiser Sheni money to buy brine, to buy fish brine. Amar lo, to which Rabbi Eliezer disagreed, and he responded, Shema lo shamaita elek shekir ve'dagim me'oravin b'hem. Rabbi Eliezer says, maybe you're referring to only when there was actual fish guts that was in this brine. Meaning, according to Rabbi Eliezer, you wouldn't be allowed to use brine alone. There would have to be some kind of fish presence in there, i.e. it would have to be actual fish. You can't just use the brine. Okay, fine. So there's a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish and Rabbi Eliezer about can you use fish brine. They both agree you can use fish, can you use just the brine. Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish says yes. Rabbi Eliezer says no. In order to use the brine, there would have to be some fish guts darting. Now says the Gemara, Vafilu Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish lo ka'amar ela b'tzir d'shumana d'feirahi, aval mayim v'melach lo. Now the question against Rabbi Yitzchak is that even the more lenient opinion here in this brisa, Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, who says that you're allowed to use fish brine, well, sure, that's fish brine, because there's at least some of the oils from the fish, the pera, the fruit in this case being relative, being the fish. So there's at least fish oil in the brine. It's not just salt and water. Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish would not say that you can use Meiser Sheni money to buy salt water. No way. So that's the kasha against Rabbi Yitzchak. Because Rabbi Yitzchak came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, and he's saying that you're allowed to use Meiser Sheni money in order to buy salt water. Yet, there's a brisa in which sort of the more lenient opinion is saying that you would be allowed to use Meiser Sheni money to buy brine that has fish oils in it, but not just plain old salt water. So how come Rabbi Yitzchak is saying that you'd be allowed to use Meiser Sheni money to buy salt water? Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef explains, Lo nitzucha ela shenasan l'sochan shemen. So Rav Yosef says that when Rabbi Yitzchak is saying that you're allowed to use Meiser Sheni money to buy salt water, it's not plain old salt water. It's salt water that has oil in it. And because there's oil in the salt water, that is why you're allowed to buy this salt water. Amar le Abai. So Abai says to Rav Yosef, but v'teipaklei mishum shemim. But if that's the case, that he's buying not just plain old salt water, but there's oil in it, so then, for all intents and purposes, he's essentially buying oil, not salt water, right? So Rav Yosef gives a very interesting answer, which is going to now take us for quite a while. Lo tzricha shenasan tmei mayim v'melach be'avla. So Rav Yosef explains, no, he's not exactly buying oil. What he's buying is this mixture of the salt water and the oil. And what's interesting about it is that, remember, you have Meiser Sheni in your field wherever you live. Now, you have to eat that in Jerusalem. So you don't want to schlep all of your produce to Jerusalem, so you transfer it to money and you bring the money to Jerusalem. And you have to spend that money in Jerusalem on food. Now, there are certain things that qualify as food, and there are certain things that don't qualify as food. Salt water doesn't qualify as food. You can't go and spend your money on salt water. And we're going to see soon other things that you can't go and just spend your money on those. But what's interesting here is that you're buying a mixture of salt water with oil. Now, part of what you're paying for is the salt water, right? Let's say you spent $1 on this mixture of salt water and oil. Maybe 25% of that money is being spent on the salt water. So you are actually spending money on salt water. But we're saying that since it's together with the oil, and you're buying the oil, and together with the oil, there's going to be some salt water, even though some of the money, the Meiser Sheni money, is now being spent on salt water, that's okay because it's absorbed together with the cost of the oil. Okay? And that is what Rav Yosef, and that's what Rav Yosef is therefore explaining Rabbi Yitzchak this way. That when Rabbi Yitzchak is coming and saying that you're allowed to spend Meiser Sheni money on salt water, it doesn't mean plain salt water, because as we saw by this brisa, the Machlokas Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, you know, the most lenient you can go really is brine. You can't just buy salt water. But Rabbi Yitzchak isn't alleging, he's not arguing that you can buy salt water. What he's arguing is that you're allowed to buy salt water that also has oil in it. And even though part of what you're paying for is the salt water, it's okay because it's absorbed together in the price of the oil that you're buying with it. So now the Gemara says, Uvavla mishari, can you do this? You know, if you're spending your Meiser Sheni money on whatever you're purchasing, but part of the purchase is going to include things that in and of themselves you wouldn't, if you know, alone you would not be able to purchase, does that make it acceptable? Or maybe I would have to, you know, spend this additional money on more acceptable foods, and you wouldn't be able to consider it as though you spent money on Meiser Sheni worthy things. In Ve'atanya, so Gemara says, yeah, you certainly are allowed to spend your Meiser Sheni money on food that might come together with other things that you generally wouldn't be able to spend the Meiser Sheni money on. Ve'atanya, and this time Ve'atanya is not a question; it's part of the flow. Ben Bagbag Omer says Ben Bagbag. So the pasuk says in the context of Meiser Sheni Babakar that you can go to Jerusalem with your Meiser Sheni money and spend it on bakar, on cow meat. Milamet shelokhin bakar al gav oro, that you can go to the butcher and you can buy some meat, and even though when he cuts up the meat and puts it on the scale and tells you how much it costs, there's going to be some skin on that meat. So basically part of what you're paying for is skin. Now, skin isn't food. You can't just go and spend your Meiser Sheni money on skin. But if you're spending the Meiser Sheni money on meat, and part of what you're paying for when you buy the meat is also whatever skin is attached to it, that is acceptable. And you don't have to go afterwards and then sell the skin and then take the money that you got from selling the skin and buy more Meiser Sheni. No, it's fine. Once you're buying the meat, if the skin kind of comes along with it, and part of what you're now spending your Meiser Sheni money on is skin, that is okay. Uvatzon, and then the same thing applies to sheep, but the chiddush over here is melamed shelo chintzon al gav gizasa, that you can spend your Meiser Sheni money to buy sheep meat, and even though the sheep meat is going to come with its skin, as well as with whatever wool is on its skin, that's no problem. Uvayoyin melamed shelo chinyayin al gav kankano. We see that you're allowed to buy wine, even though when you buy wine, you're going to have to buy it in some kind of a bottle. And the bottle, you know, you can't just spend your money on bottles. But if to buy the wine, you have to buy the wine with the bottle that it's in, well then, that's fine. You know, it's okay that you're spending your money, part of your money is going towards that bottle. Uva shechar, as well as other intoxicants, melamed shelokhin temed mishehechmitz, that you can spend your money on temed. Temed is, they would basically take the grape pits and like add water to it and it would ferment. And even though much of what that drink is essentially water, but nonetheless you could spend your money on that and that would be acceptable. Zeu. So we see from this brisa of Ben Bagbag that you would be permitted to spend your Meiser Sheni money on things that alone you would not be able to spend your money on, but when they are mixed together with other things, you can. That would be acceptable. And therefore, Rabbi Yosef is explaining Rabbi Yitzchak, when Rabbi Yitzchak says that you're allowed to spend Meiser Sheni money on salt water, what he means is that if you have this mixture of salt water and oil, even though part of what you're paying for is the salt water, which in and of itself you would not be allowed to buy alone, but since it's together with the oil, you'd be allowed to buy the oil, even though part of the money is going towards the salt water. Fine. Now, Rabbi Yochanan asks sort of like a question or a challenge on Ben Bagbag's brisa, and we're going to kind of explain this challenge for the next little bit. So, Rabbi Yochanan, says Rabbi Yochanan, Man metargim li babakar aliba de Ben Bagbag movilna mane abasir levei mesusa. So says Rabbi Yochanan, if anybody can explain to me how come, according to Ben Bagbag's brisa, we really need the Torah to say babakar, if you can explain that to me, well then I will honor you by carrying your clothing behind you to the bathhouse. Rabbi Yochanan is saying, Ben Bagbag just had this brisa where he explained babakar, batzon, bayayin, bashechar, what we learn out from each one of those things in terms of spending your Meiser Sheni money. Now says Rabbi Yochanan, I understand why I need tzon, I understand why I need yayin, I understand why I need shechar. I don't understand what bakar is teaching me that I don't already know. And if somebody can explain that to me, I will carry his clothing behind him to the bathhouse. Okay? My time, how come? Like, what's pshat? What's his challenge? Because kulu tzriche levar mi babakar de lo tzarich. Because we need all of these other things in the pasuk, tzon, yayin, shechar. We do not need the pasuk to say bakar. It doesn't teach us any chiddush. My tzriche. What do you mean by we need all of these other things? The ikasav rachmana babakar. Okay. Well, because if the pasuk, let's start with bakar. If the pasuk would have only taught us bakar, that you're allowed to spend your Meiser Sheni money on cow meat. Okay. Hava aminos, I would have said, bakar udim izdabin agav oro, mishum de gufeu. So then I would say, okay, I get it. So I could spend my money on cow's meat, and that will come together with the skin of the cow. And even though part of my money is being spent on cow skin, which isn't edible, it's fine. What are you going to do? The skin is really very much part of the cow. And therefore it comes together with it. And even though part of what I'm spending my money on is skin, it's okay because it's really part of the cow. Avot son. Agav gizasa dlav gufehu emalo. But sheep, where the wool isn't really as much part of the body of the sheep as the skin is, right? And as Rashi says, I can prove it to you by, I can easily shear the wool of a sheep while it's alive, and it's not a big deal, whereas try removing that skin while the sheep is alive, and it'll probably be a big problem. So clearly the skin is a lot more part of the body than the wool is. And therefore, if we would only teach cow, so then I would say that it's okay to spend your money to buy cow meat even though it comes with the skin, because the skin is really very much part of the animal. However, if I'm buying sheep meat, and that meat comes together with skin and with wool, well, then I might think that the money that's going towards the wool would be a problem because it's not really as much part of the animal. So therefore, we also have to teach in the pasuk sheep to say that even though part of your money is going towards the wool, that's acceptable. Okay. Because of Achman Batzon, okay, and if the pasuk would have only said sheep, Agav gizasa, meaning to teach us that the money can be spent towards its wool. Havamina mishum de mechuber, because at least the wool is connected to the sheep. Aval yayin agav kankano. But if I spend the money on wine, and that wine comes in some kind of a bottle, and I'm spending money on the bottle, which isn't actually connected to the wine, it's not part of the wine, emalo. So I'll say that I can't spend part of my Meiser Sheni money to pay for the bottle that the wine comes in. So therefore I need the pasuk to say yain as well, to say that no, it's okay to spend your money on the wine, even though part of your money is going towards the bottle. Because of Rachmana b'yain, and if the pasuk would say, stop at wine, but not say sheichar, havamina mishum dahainu nitiruse, well, I could spend money on the wine, and even though part of the money is going towards the bottle, because the bottle is after all necessary to preserve the wine, to guard the wine, right? Otherwise it'll get dirty. I don't know how you can have wine without a bottle. So aval temed mishehichmitz dikiyua be'almo, but when you have this water that you put in grape seeds and stuff and it ferments, it's just basically some kind of glorified water. So I might not think that it's really something that you can buy with Meiser Sheni money. So emalo kasavach mana sheichar. That's why it says the sheichar, to say you can even buy this glorified fermented water, pitty, grapey stuff. Okay, fine. So we explained so far why we need all four of them, right? If I only knew cows, I wouldn't know sheep. If I only knew sheep, I wouldn't know wine. If I only knew wine, I wouldn't know this watery, winey, pitty stuff. Okay, so then just write the watery, winey, pitty stuff, and then shouldn't I know everything else? So now because of Achmana b'sheichar, if we would only have this sheichar, this temed, watery, winey, pitty stuff, so hava amina, my sheichar, well then I would have thought, you know what sheichar actually is? Devela ke'ilis de peru. What this sheichar actually is, I will say that this sheichar is these ke'ilis figs that were also intoxicating, but they were, after all, just fruit, right? And therefore I'm spending my Meiser Sheni money on fruit. Aval yayin agav kankano emalo. So I'd say, okay, you know what this sheichar is? Sheichar is this intoxicating figs. And it's some kind of a fruit, so I could spend my Meiser Sheni on fruit. But to spend my money on wine that comes together with a bottle, what does a bottle have to do with anything? I would say that you're not allowed to spend Meiser Sheni money on wine that comes with the bottle. So therefore, the pasuk had to also say that you can use wine that comes in a bottle. Because of Rachmana yayin agav kankano, down in tiruse, but if the pasuk would stop at wine, I would say that, look, I can buy the wine, even though it comes together with its bottle, because after all, I need the bottle to preserve the wine. Avot son, agav gizasa. But to buy sheep together with its wool, what do I need the wool for? How come I'm allowed to spend my money, my Meiser Sheni money towards wool? Emalo, I would say that does not work. Because of Rachmana tzon, tafilo agav gizasa. And therefore, the pasuk says, you know what? You can also buy sheep, even though it comes together with the wool. It's fine. You could spend your money on that. Okay. So far we kind of understand why we need all of these other things, right? Sheep and wine and sheichar. But here's the question. Babakar lamali. At this point, I do not need cow. What does cow teach me that at this point I don't already know? Leave out cow. I know that I could spend my money on this grapey, watery, temedy stuff. I can spend my money on wine even though it comes together with the bottle because it protects it. I could spend my money on sheep even though it comes together with the skin and the wool. What am I learning from babakar? What am I learning from cow? That I could buy it together with the skin? I already know that from the sheep. I could buy the sheep after all with the skin and the wool. What am I learning from cow? Babakar lamali. Why do I need the pasuk to tell me babakar that I could spend my Meiser Sheni money on cows? V'chitema ilo kasav rachmana babakar. Maybe you'll try to argue that no, I need the pasuk to teach me cows, because if it doesn't teach me cows, well then hava aminat son agav ora in agav gizasalo. I might think that if the pasuk only said sheep and didn't say anything about cows, I might think that sheep I can only buy with the skin, but I wouldn't be able to buy it with the wool. And therefore, kasav rachmana babakar la'asuye oro, aiser leitzon la'asuye gizasa. Meaning, so I might think that if the pasuk did not say anything about cows, I might think, you know what, you can learn out from sheep that I could buy a sheep together with its skin, but I cannot spend the money to go towards the wool of the sheep. And therefore, the pasuk taught me cows to say that from cows I learn out that you can buy the meat together with the skin. Well, then what do you learn out from sheep? That even the wool, you could spend the money on the wool of the sheep. But if it would only have sheep without cow, I might think that I could spend my Meiser Sheni money towards the sheep with its skin, but not include the wool. But by including cow in the pasuk, clearly cow is teaching that I could buy the meat with the skin, and sheep is teaching I can buy the meat with the skin and the wool. But says the Gemara, it's not good logic. It's not good logic. I do not need the cow. I can learn out the sheep with the skin and the wool just from the sheep alone. Because ilo kasav achmana babakar lo hava amina son agav ora in agav gizasa lo. Says the Gemara, if the pasuk would not have said anything about cow, I would not have come to the conclusion that sheep only includes the skin but excludes the wool. De'im kein lichto rachmana bakar. If sheep was only coming to include the skin but exclude the wool, well then why mention sheep in the first place? Just mention cows. Mention something that doesn't have wool. That if you would just say cow, then automatically I wouldn't have any need for sheep if it's only teaching me that you could buy the meat with the skin but not the wool. Well, then sheep become completely irrelevant. It doesn't teach me anything new. All I need essentially is the cow, right? So basically, if the pasuk wanted to just teach me that I can buy meat with the skin but not with the wool, so then just teach me cows. Why teach me sheep? And therefore, if the pasuk would have only taught sheep, the afilu agav gizasa, that it would therefore teach me even with its wool, right? So again, right? So well, then the pasuk says, so the Gemara says, "Babakar lamali." Well, then how come I need to teach about cows? Hashtatzon agav gizasa mizdabna bakar agav oro mibaya, right? If I can buy a sheep with its wool, then certainly I could buy the meat of a cow with its skin. Okay, so therefore, let's just finish up. Hainu de Ka'amar Rabbi Yochanan, that's exactly what Rabbi Yochanan says. Manda metargam li babakar, aliba de ben bagbag. If anybody could explain to me, based on ben bagbag's brisa, that, why we need the pasuk to tell me babakar, movilna mani levei mesusa, I will carry his clothing after him to the bathhouse, right? Rabbi Yochanan makes a pretty compelling argument that we do not need the word babakar in that pasuk about discussing what you can spend your Meiser Sheni money on. It doesn't teach us absolutely anything, right? Because if it would just have shechar and yain and son, I would know everything that I need to know, right? I would know that I can buy this temed stuff that's the water with the fermented grape seeds. I would also know that I could buy wine, even though part of what I'm spending money on is going to be the bottle that it comes in. I would know that I can buy sheep together with its skin and together with its wool, because after all, that's why it's teaching sheep, to teach me that I can even spend money on the wool as well. Teaching bakar doesn't teach me anything. That I could buy the cow meat together with the skin. I know that from sheep, plus the wool. Sheep is a much better thing. So really, there's no need to teach bakar whatsoever in that pasuk. That is Rabbi Yochanan's answer. That is Rabbi Yochanan's question. If anybody knows the answer, let me know, and I will make sure that Rabbi Yochanan, to get it to Rabbi Yochanan, and he will carry your clothing behind you to the bathhouse. Weiter. So now the Gemara asks, about what do Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish and Rabbi Eliezer on the one hand argue about with these other Tanaim that we are going to mention in a minute from now, maybe a few minutes. So remember, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish argued about, can you use fish brine? Can you spend your Meiser Sheni money on fish brine? Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish said, look, yeah, my family, that's what we did. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, you can't just buy fish brine, it needs to have some fish guts dartin. So now, but they both agree that you can spend your money on fish. That's for sure. Now, apparently there are going to be these other Tanaim who say that you cannot spend Meiser Sheni money on fish. So, what exactly is the reason for their dispute? Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, Rabbi Eliezer darshe ribuye umiute. So the answer is that Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish and Rabbi Eliezer learn out what you can spend your Meiser Sheni money on from a ribui and a miut. V'hani tanai darshe klalei ufrate, whereas these other tanaim that we still haven't gotten to yet, where they learn out their opinion for what you can spend your Meiser Sheni money on from a klal ufrat uchal. Well, klalei ufrate, klal ufrat. Okay, so ribui and miut means that the pasuk first included lots of stuff and then excluded things, whereas klal ufrat means that it gave a general rule and then gave a specific rule. Okay. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, Rabbi Eliezer darshe ribuye umiute. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish and Rabbi Eliezer learn out the pasuk by Meiser Sheni as a ribui and a miut. V'nosata kesef b'chol asher taiva nafshecha, that you can spend your money on anything you want. Riba. Well, that seems to include quite a bit of things. But then the pasuk says, cows, sheep, wine, and intoxicants. Mi'et. Well, that just limited things. But then it says, anything that your soul can ask for. Okay, well, that once again included lots of things. So chazav v'riba. It included things once again. So riba u'mi'et v'riba. So it first included lots of stuff, anything that you could possibly desire. And then it excluded things, because it just said cows, sheep, wine, and intoxicants. V'riba. And then it included everything once again, anything that your soul can ask for. So riba, so when it says, so riba hakol, so again, so I'm sorry, did I skip? Shazacha chazav riba, so riba u'mi'et v'riba, riba hakol, so it includes everything. My Rabbi kol mile, it included absolutely everything. U'may mi'et, so then what is being excluded by the mi'ut? Rabbi Eliezer mi'et tzir, Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish mi'et mayim v'melach. So the way that it works with a ribu and a miut, so when you have this situation where we included all sorts of stuff, and then we excluded stuff, and then we included everything, so there's one thing that's going to be excluded. And the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish is, what's that one thing that's excluded? According to Rabbi Eliezer, it's excluding tzir, fish brine. According to Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish, no, fish brine you can buy, it's excluding just plain old salt water. But both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish agree that you would be able to spend the money on fish. Just the question is, can you spend it on fish brine? Okay. And then these other Tanaim, Darshe Klale Ufrate, they look at this pasuk not as a ribu and a miut, rather as a klal and a prat. The Tanya is within the Brisa, so you could spend your money on anything you desire, klal, so that's a general kind of rule, anything that you want. Cows and sheep and wine and intoxicants, that's a prat, it's specific. And anything that your soul can ask for, that is once again a general rule. So now what happens when you have a general rule and then a specific and then a general rule? So what you do is you focus in on the specific. Just like the specifics, which are cows and sheep and wine and intoxicants, these are things that come one fruit from the other, right? Whether it's like grapes that come from a seed, or whether it is a cow or a sheep that come from its mother. Vigidule karka, and they also are sustained from the ground. So I've called pri vigidule karka. So therefore, when it comes to Meiser Sheni, you can purchase anything that is a fruit that comes from another fruit and is sustained from the ground. V'tani idach, and we have another brisa that says, Ma'aprat meforish vlados haaretz, just like the prat are things that came from the ground when the world was created. Avko vlad uvlados haaretz. So you can only purchase things that are a vlad, that are a child, and came from the ground when the world was created. My benayu was an nafkamina amrabai dagim ika benayu. So Bai says that the nafkamina between the two brisas is fish. Manda amar pri vigidule karka hani dagim gidule karka ninu. So according to the first brisa, which says that what you can spend your Meiser Sheni money on is anything that is a fruit that comes from a fruit and is sustained from the ground. Well, that includes fish, because fish are sustained from the ground, because I guess somehow they get some kind of sustenance, maybe from the bottom of the ocean, whatever it is. I don't know, or maybe they go to like the shores and eat stuff that grows there. But they nonetheless are assumed to get sustenance from the ground, and therefore you can spend your Ma'aser Sheni money on that. But if you say that it's something that was created from the ground, well, fish were created from the water, so therefore you can't spend your money on that. Alright, that was Daf Chav Zayin of Masechta Ayruvin. Let us review what we have learned. So we started a new parak of Bakom Arvin, and basically said you can make an Eruv on anything other than salt and water, which we then got into details about salt and water and salt water. Now, we started off by saying that according to Rabbi Yochanan, says that you can't rely on general rules even when the exceptions are listed over there. Examples of general rules that you can't rely on is, for example, mitzvah saseh she'azman grama, women are pturos, yet there are mitzvah saseh she'azman grama that women are chayavos. And then we have mitzvah saseh she'lo azman grama, women are chayavos, and yet there are mitzvah saseh she'lo azman grama that women are pturos from. So, therefore, clearly we can't just rely on general rules. And then, even when the exceptions are listed there, such as by a zav, right, it says that anything that a zav sits on is tahor, the exceptions being mishkav umoshav and a human, yet there's also this thing on the saddle. As well as by Eruv, it says you can make an Eruv with anything other than water and salt, yet you also can't make an Eruv with mushrooms and truffles. Okay. And then we had the idea, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, who said that when it comes to Eruv or when it comes to Ma'aser Sheni, that they each had their own opinion. One opinion was that while you cannot use salt or water, you can use salt water for Eruv, but not for Ma'aser Sheni. The other opinion was that you can't use salt or water for Ma'aser Sheni, you can use salt water, and that would include Eruv as well. And then we talked about buying salt water with Ma'aser Sheni money. Okay, so we said that Rabbi Yitzchak came to Bavel, and he said that you're allowed to spend Ma'aser Sheni money on salt water. But then we asked a kasha from a brisa, where we have Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish and Rabbi Eliezer, who say that you cannot buy salt water with Ma'aser Sheni money. You can only buy fish brine, but not just salt water. So Rabbi Yosef came to explain what was the shaila if you could use fish brine, but certainly you can't use salt water. So Rabbi Yosef explained Rabbi Yitzchak as saying that when Rabbi Yitzchak says that you're allowed to use Ma'aser Sheni money to buy salt water, it doesn't mean just salt water plain. It means, interestingly, that you're allowed to spend the Ma'aser Sheni money on salt water that's mixed together with oil, and even though part of your money is going to be spent on the salt water, that's acceptable since you're allowed to buy the oil. And then we got into, and we proved it from the fact that you're allowed to buy meat even though it comes with skin, and then we got into kind of a whole discussion about all sorts of stuff that you're allowed to buy alongside other things. Then Rabbi Yochanan had his challenge that, again, if anybody knows the answer, let me know, and I will try my hardest to get it to Rabbi Yochanan. No guarantees. Anyways, then we talked about buying fish with Ma'aser Sheni money. We had Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish and Rabbi Eliezer says, yes, you can definitely buy fish. The question is about fish brine, but you can definitely buy fish. Then we had these other Tanaim who say that, no, you cannot spend the Ma'aser Sheni money on fish. And the question was, what's the machlokes? So we said that Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish and Rabbi Eliezer learn out this pasuk by Ma'aser Sheni as a ribu and a miut, which means that we're excluding one thing, essentially, at the end of the day. Rabbi Eliezer says that that's fish brine. Rabbi Yehuda ben Gadish says that that is salt water, but they both agree that you can use fish, that you could buy fish. The other Tanaim learned it out from a klal ufrat, and there was two different ways to learn out the klal ufrat. According to one of them, it would exclude fish, that you cannot use the Ma'aser Sheni money to buy fish. Chevra, hope you enjoyed Daf Chav Zayin, Masechta Ayruvin. Peace out.